World Geography, Africa, Geographic Foundations. Here are the learning objectives. 1. Describe the following physical features and locate them on a physical map. Plateau, Basin, Rift Valley, Sahara Desert, the Nile, Okavango Delta. 2. What are the causes and consequences of desertification in the Sahel? 3. Describe Africa's climate and vegetation. 4. How is dam construction related to flood control on the Nile River? 5. Why do so many Africans lack access to safe drinking water? 6. Muslims live mostly in the north. Christians live mostly south of the Sahara. What might we infer from this statement? 7. Identify the types of resources found in Africa. Political maps. Here's a simple political map of the African continent. You might want to pause here and attempt to identify some of the major countries. You might want to identify, say, Egypt, Algeria, Ethiopia, Somalia, on the Horn of Africa there. You might want to see if you can find the Democratic Republic of the Congo and South Africa, which is right on the tip of the continent. Here's another map of the African continent showing its relationship to other nearby locations. It's south of the European continent and it's west of the Southwest Asian continent. Physical map. Here's a physical map of the African continent. It's a little hard to see some of the features like the Nile River. If you look closely, you can see it. The Sahara Desert, another main physical feature. As you move towards the middle of the continent, towards the equator, you're going to locate more rainforest type vegetation. Physical features. Plateau Continent. Africa is often called the Plateau Continent. It's shaped like an upside-down pie plate. In the center, there's a high, dry plateau. Remember that a plateau is an area of relatively level, high ground. Here's a photograph of a plateau. You can see that it's higher than the surrounding land and it's relatively flat on top. Basins. In the African interior are low-lying areas called basins. Rivers form in these basins and they flow rapidly downstream towards the sea. Now, Africa is a very high plateau continent, so the rivers flow really fast. And most ships, they're unable to sail very far into the interior on these fast-flowing rivers. Definition of a basin is that it's a natural depression in the surface of the land, often with a lake or a river at the bottom of it. Here's a famous basin here, referred to as the Congo Basin. Very spectacular. Congo Basin. The large low-lying Congo Basin sits at the very center of the continent. The Congo River, it loops through this basin and then empties into the Atlantic Ocean. Further south, you're going to find the Zambezi River with its many waterfalls. The largest waterfall is Victoria Falls. Rift valleys. Rift valleys are found in East Africa, and they are formed as continental tectonic plates pulled apart from one another. This is divergent plate boundary. The large lakes of Tanganyika, Victoria, Nyasa, they lie within the Great Rift Valley. East of Lake Victoria, and rising from the flat plains of Africa, is Mount Kilimanjaro. It's the highest point in Africa. North of Lake Victoria are the Ethiopian Highlands. Here's a photograph of a man standing right at the edge of the Great Rift Valley in Kenya. Here's a map of the center part of Africa. See if you can identify the Great Rift Valley on the east coast or near the east coast. Also, you'd like to be able to identify Mount Kilimanjaro and the Ethiopian Plateau or Ethiopian Highlands as well. Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is in North Africa, and it's the world's largest. Physical features include sand, dunes, bare rock, gravel plains, mountains, a variety of features. Because remember, a desert's not defined by its features, but how much rain it receives. Less than 10 inches a year, it's a desert. The Nile, Africa's longest river, flows north through the Sahara, and it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Namib and Kalahari. Two deserts, besides the Sahara, the Namib and the Kalahari, they make up much of the southern part of the African continent. The only permanent river in the region is the Okavango, and it forms a delta and a marsh in the Kalahari Desert at certain times of the year. At those times of the year, the area is rich in wildlife. The Okavango Delta itself is an inland delta, very unusual. Its waters do not flow into any ocean or sea. The definition of delta is a low triangular area of alluvial deposits where a river divides before it enters a larger body of water, or in the case of the Okavango, enters open land. Here's a picture of the Okavango Delta in Botswana. Sahel desertification. The Sahel. The Sahel is a narrow band of grassland, and it runs just east to west along the southern edge of the Sahara. People use the Sahel for farming and herding. Desertification, though, has been occurring in the region since the 1960s. And desertification is the expansion of dry conditions into moist areas that are next to deserts. Here's a map showing the Sahel region, and the process of desertification. Causes of desertification. Human activities. This increases the pace of desertification. Livestock overgrazing, the clearing of native grasses for food crops leads to increased erosion. Remember that erosion is the condition in which the Earth's surface is worn away by the action of water and wind. Other activities that increase the pace of desertification include digging deep wells for crop irrigation. This increases the salt level of the soil and prevents new vegetation from growing. Another activity increasing desertification is the population is growing, and it puts stress on the land since more people require more food and more wood for fuel. Here's a diagram of the process of desertification. You can follow it along through the 4 steps if you want to pause here for a moment. This is the food and nutrition crisis being created by desertification in the Sahel region. You can see the number of people who are dying for lack of food. Climate. Equatorial Africa. The equator runs through the middle of Africa. Remember that locations near equator are warm year-round because the sun is almost directly overhead. And our definition, our classic definition of equator, is that it is an imaginary line around the Earth forming the great circle that is equidistant from north and south poles. Convectional precipitation. Of course, near the equator, in the mornings, as the air warms, the air expands like a hot air balloon, and it rises. The humid air drops moisture in the form of rain as it cools in the upper atmosphere. And this rain pattern we call convectional precipitation. Any remaining air is dry now, and it begins to move towards the north and south poles. The fact that the air has such little moisture in it at this point as it moves away from the equator, this helps explain why there are deserts in North Africa and deserts in South Africa as well. No moisture in the air. Vegetation. Savanna. About 2/5 of Africa is tropical grassland, or as they call it, the savanna. And the best known savanna is the Serengeti in Tanzania. The country is Tanzania. The name of the savanna is Serengeti. The savanna contains grasses and trees that have adapted to this tropical wet and dry climate. For instance, the trees may drop their leaves in a long dry season, or some trees have trunks that can store water, while some of the grasses have really long roots that reach for water deep in the earth. Here you have a resident of the Serengeti looking for his next meal. Desert. Desert and desert scrub cover most of North Africa and also the southern deserts. Desert scrub includes things like trees and bushes that have adapted to the dry climate. Along the shore of the Mediterranean Sea in North Africa is chaparral. And chaparral, well, they have it in California as well, and it's a dense vegetation of stunted trees and thorny bushes. Broadleaf evergreen forest runs along the Nile through Egypt. Plenty of water there. Rainforest and highlands. Rainforests can be found in the southern part of West Africa and in the Congo Basin in Central Africa. Rainforests exist in tropical areas with a heavy annual rainfall. In the Ethiopian highlands, the vegetation changes according to the altitude. On the lower slopes, you're going to find bamboo and cedar trees and ferns. Higher up, there are meadows, even mosses and lichens on the mountain slopes. The Nile. The Nile is the world's longest river system, running through the world's largest desert, the Sahara. The Nile flows northward more than 4,000 miles through Uganda, South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt before it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. It's the primary water resource in Egypt and Sudan for drinking and irrigation. Here you have a map of the Nile River, some of the countries that it flows through. Nile Delta floods. Historically, for thousands of years, annual floods have replenished the fertile lands of the Nile Delta. However, the floods were inconsistent, couldn't be predicted, and they often led to a loss of life. In 1970, the Egyptians completed the Aswan High Dam, and this was built to control flooding on the Nile. A large artificial lake formed behind the dam called Lake Nasser. Egyptian farming. The Aswan High Dam provides farmers a regular supply of water. Water is released as it's needed for effective irrigation in the delta. Irrigation canals and chemical fertilizers, they keep some of the fields in year-round continuous production. Egyptian arable land has been increased since the completion of the dam by 50%. The term arable refers to land that's capable of being productively farmed. Devastating droughts and floods have been avoided. Access to water. Safety. 300 million Africans do not have access to safe drinking water, and 50% of Africans suffer from at least one water-related disease. Scarcity. 14 countries on the continent suffer from water scarcity, even though Africa has 17 large rivers and more than 160 major lakes. It turns out that Africa uses just 4% of total annual renewable water resources for its agriculture, industry, and domestic consumption. The challenge in Africa is getting the water to where it's needed the most, doing that affordably and efficiently. 50% of urban water, it's lost through inefficient delivery, leaky pipes, and 75% of rural water evaporates before it reaches the fields. Population. Characteristics. A little over 1 billion people live in Africa. This is about 15% of the world's total population. Africa has the fastest growing population. Even today, 60% of Africans still reside in rural areas, isolated in small villages. However, like all continents, urbanization is increasing rapidly. Here's a dot population map of the African continent. You can see how most people live near coastal areas, or they live near water sources like the Nile River, or the water sources in the Rift Valley region. Religion. Africans follow different religious traditions. 40% are Muslims. Most of them are concentrated in North and West Africa. They've been influenced by the nomads who roamed here from Southwest Asia and into North Africa and brought their religion with them. Christians slightly outnumber Muslims and live in sub-Saharan Africa, mostly south of the Sahara Desert. These Africans were mostly influenced by missionaries who came from Europe when the continent was colonized. Over 100 million people practice indigenous religions. These are religions that try to explain the meaning of the universe and try and tell people or teach them what's right and wrong. Economic activity. Resources. In Central and Southern Africa, diamond and gold mines are an important source of revenue. However, civil wars are often financed with these mineral profits. Petroleum is also a major resource in North and West Africa. Primary activities. Nomadic herding takes place on the African grasslands. Of course, herders have no permanent home and they move from place to place to find food and water for their animals. More than 1/2 of the continent's farmland is used for subsistence agriculture. Remember, that's growing just enough food for yourself and your immediate family. Commercial agriculture. Commercial agriculture is common in some areas. For instance, Egyptian farmers raise cotton along the Nile River and in the Nile Delta. Commercial date palms grow around oases in the Sahara. An oasis is a fertile spot in the desert where some water is found. And then there are rainforests where cocoa beans are produced. Commercial manufacturing. Commercial manufacturing industries are located in South Africa, the country of South Africa. It produces about 40% of Africa's manufactured goods, automobiles, clothing, steel, electronics. Raw materials export. Many African nations depend upon the export of just one or two principal commodities for much of their earnings through trade. They would be better if they engaged in economic diversification, and this would allow their economies to protect themselves if there was a sudden price drop in the commodity that they were producing in their country. The end. Thank you for your attention.